Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Jewish Muslim Religious Fraternity, past, present, and future with Rabbi Yakov Nagen. Rabbi Dr. Yakov Nagen is head of the Beit Midrash for Judaism and Humanity and executive director of the Ohr Torah Interfaith Center. He holds a BA and an MA from Yeshiva University, rabbinic ordination from RIETS, and a PhD in Jewish philosophy from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. A leading advocate of religion as a force for peace, he has been deeply involved in interfaith between Judaism and Islam for over 2 decades. He is the author of 10 books and numerous articles on Jewish spirituality, Talmud, and interfaith relations. He was featured in Tablet magazine as one of the 10 Israeli rabbis you should know. His recent books include God Shall Be One, Reenvisioning Judaism's approach to other religions, and That They May Live Among You, Minorities in a Jewish State, an Ethic of Responsibility and Partnership. We are so lucky to have him here today to talk about his interfaith work and his wonderful teachings. Feel free to take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Jasmine, for the introduction. For many years, I begin every encounter by noting today's date, because there's something remarkable about today's date. It never was, and it never will be again, which means today is unique. And if we really, really live the meaning that today is not coming back, it is unique, it can help us push ourselves to live it to the fullest. So something to keep in mind, Hayom, Chaf Daled Sivan, Taf Shin Pei Vav, Ze Hayom, Asa Adonai, Nagila v'nismachavo. And I think perhaps I'll begin by giving a presentation and to leave as much time as possible for discussion. I'll start with the presentation and we'll save the discussion for as much time as we could save when I finish. And also, I'll start at the end and then work back to the beginning. Starting the end, meaning that I just got back from the United Arab Emirates, and it was truly coming back with hope and joy. So to share some on-the-ground experience, and then afterwards backtrack to the theological ideas, but to show that this issue relates to a lived reality. I'll start from the end, from the recent trip to the Emirates. We brought a delegation, the Jerusalem Interfaith Center. We brought a delegation representing more than 20 organizations in Israel. And years ago, there was a famous speech by the president of Israel, Ruby Rivlin, about Israeli society having 4 tribes. You have the ultra-Orthodox Haredim, you have the religious Zionist, you have secular, and you have Arab society as the 4 tribes of Israel. And in our delegation, the more than 30 representatives were men and women from all 4 of the tribes coming together, the United Tribes of Israel coming to the United Arab Emirates to deal with interfaith issues, to promote our vision of Jewish Muslim Religious Fraternity. The overarching, there was a global conference on dialogue between civilizations, but many, many encounters with figures from all walks of life from the Emirates. The one message, first of all, feeling even in the streets, even just random encounters with people from grassroots, bottom up, from top down, a warmth, friendliness, acceptance within this society. And what's very critical for the Emiratis to stress, and we're truly with some of the most important figures. We had a evening, all of us hosted by the chairman of defense and internal affairs of the Emirates, religious leaders, secular leaders, was their deep feeling that their relationship with Israel is not merely interests, which certainly I hope it serves their interest for the better, but also about identity. Where I say we have two eyes. We have our one eye are our interests, the other eye are our identities. And hearing again and again their belief that the Abraham Accords that so much changed the landscape in the Middle East and have been tested by fire throughout the current war and persevered, this is not just about the interests, but it's about identity. It's about a belief that there is a great shared story of the people in the Middle East, that we all have a place and part in it, and it's more beautiful together. And that's why it has been so resilient. To quote, one of our stops was a museum of civilization. A dear friend of mine, Ahmed Mansouri, he built an entire museum. It has a section dedicated to the Holocaust, a section dedicated through Jewish culture through the ages. And one way he expressed his belief that it's not only about the interests, it's real. He said, we've learned the hard way. When you have war, you have a enemy. When you make peace, you have enemies, referring to the fact, the price that the United Arab Emirates has paid for the Abraham Accords. In the recent war with Iran, they were hit with more missiles than even Israel. And clearly they were singled out for missile attacks because known of their close partnership with Israel. And the Abraham Accords is a path of reconciliation, of partnership, which is everything that the Iranians detest. One beautiful site in Abu Dhabi is the Abraham Family House. And I think that word family is essential. It's not just the Abraham house, saying there are different Abraham religions. It's the Abraham family houses, a statement, we are family. The ruler of the Emirates, Mohammed ibn Zayed, at his expense, he built 3 enormous and beautiful, a mosque, a church, and a Beit Knesset, all masterpieces of architecture, enormous, standing side by side as a center to be the message they want to convey that we are family, we are partners in a beautiful story. There's a woman's mikvah, there's a men mikvah there. The ruler pays for the kiddush every Shabbos morning. I was there for Shabbos once. So feeling it's not just abstract ideas or lip service at conferences, it's a lived reality. So truly, I returned with the group, realizing that yes, it's as dismal sometimes things seem, these voices exist and realities are created of seeing blessings in diversity, seeing certainly within the Abrahamic religions, they also have a Hindu temple there, but seeing there's a deep brotherhood. So this is one part of recent activities, and then maybe I'll share some of the messages that we focused on when we were at the Emirates. Afterwards, I'll go back to some of the earlier roots of this. Last 2 weeks ago, Islam commemorated its most significant holiday, Eid al-Adha, which commemorates the story of the offering of Avram, of his son. Of course, in the Torah, the son is Yitzchak. In the Quran, it's not explicit, but most commentators understand it to be Yishmael. And a shallow view of things could lead, okay, let's start having some sort of a competition. Was it us? Was it our father? Or was it your father? Again, always to find things to fight about. But a beautiful response to the question, who was it? Who is the son being being offered by Abraham was given by a dear friend of mine, Sheikh Rasa Manasra. When asked this question on Israeli television, he's a sheikh from Nazareth. He said, well, if it's Ishmael, it's my father. If it's Yitzchak, it's my uncle. Either way, it's family. Family we have to love. And my take on Eid al-Adha and the stories in the Quran and the Torah, that if you look closely, both stories give a place for both sons. In the Quran, in the Surah 37, that tells the story of the offering, ends by mentioning by name that Abraham receiving tidings of a son, Yitzchak, will be given great blessings. In the same way, my father-in-law, Professor Uriel Simon, a known professor of Tanakh in Israel, points out a concept that he calls the Akedah of Yishmael, because in the book of Bereshis, juxtaposed to the story of Akedat Yitzchak is a parallel story of Akedah of Yishmael, the story of Hagar, certainly one of the great heroines of the Torah, Hagar going into the desert with her son Ishmael, certain that death will be approaching, and suddenly at the last moment an angel comes, just like in the story of the Akedah, an angel coming at the last moment saying God wants life and not death, and giving a blessing to Ishmael, just like Yitzchak gets a blessing. So both the Quran and the Torah have the message. Avram loved both his sons. Both of them are blessed by God. And relating to that blessing, I recently came to an amazing discovery, which is my topic at the conference. So it hasn't been published yet, so you can hear it first here. One of the great rabbinical figures of the Middle Ages was Rabbeinu Hananel. Rabbeinu Hananel, he lived in the 10th century. He took pretty much the responsa of the Gaonim, the 5 centuries between the end of the Talmud to his times, made into a commentary to the Talmud, and that became the source of the Rif, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch. One of the greatest rabbis of history, he comments on the story about the blessing to Ishmael. He says something truly remarkable. He says, it took 2,333 years for the blessing to Ishmael to become a nation to take place. So too, we, the Jewish people, should not despair that it's taking so long for our blessing to be fulfilled. So I sat down and did the mathematics from the rabbinical chronology of when Abraham was born to Abraham being 99 years old, according to the Torah, when he got that blessing, adding 2,333 years, you get year 621, which if your screens were open, I see everyone falling out of their seats, because everyone knows that 621 is the year that Muhammad fled from Mecca when he and his followers were persecuted and came to what's known as Medina, the country, the nation, the city, and where the nation began, and that's when the Islamic chronology begins as year 1. So we have a rabbinical affirmation of the blessing of Ishmael as being fulfilled within Islam. And in the same way, the Quran, as the verse, if you want to check it, it's verse 104 in Surah 17, that when the Jews initially entered the land of Israel, God said, enter the land, and the promise of the hereafter, I will gather you, and again you will enter the land. So we have, again, a mutuality of acknowledgement that we are family, We are blessed by God, and within this blessed reality, we have to figure out, as the book that Bernard Lewis, the great Middle East expert, wrote, what went wrong? Why is it that much of lived reality seems so distant from this vision? So again, I'll give a disclaimer. I'm not claiming that the lived reality on planet Earth is in accordance to this message that we are family, we are authentic, we are past following the faith and tradition of Abraham, blessed and beloved all by God. But what I will try to mention, and maybe later in the discussions, to try to give a larger voice to, that the complexities of reality, yes, there are perversions. There, as the Talmud says, that the Torah itself could be a potion of life and a potion of death, or as that to say, indeed, there are lived realities that are contrary to everything I'm saying now, but even in the present, there are lived realities that express, such as I've just shared with the United Arab Emirates, and I've had similar experiences in Morocco, in Indonesia, and in large segments of Israeli society, that this is a lived reality, this fraternity. There are many, perhaps most places in the world, that this is in a sharp contrast, but we're here to change the world, and part of our work, and I asked for a monogram to be sent into the to the chat that you could download, that will give a theological basis much broader than I'll be able to present tonight, to give the theological roots, not cherry picking, but the argument why authentically. I'll bring some examples that this is the rule. It is not that it could go both ways. I feel there is the rule. There is the simple meaning of what is expressed by the Torah and what is expressed by the Quran and the Hadith. And there are perversions, not a subjective two ways, and let me cherry pick what I like. And this is part of my mission. And what I'm sending you you'll be getting in English in the chat, but I have this, I've translated into Farsi, Urdu, Arabic, of course in Hebrew, and European languages. A wild guess was perhaps your English might be better than your Urdu, Farsi, or whatnot. But to argue that this is the authentic interpretations, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs would call out violence in the name of God, would call out media that would refer to malicious, violent people doing sacrilegious acts of violence, calling them fundamentalists, arguing that the opposite is true. These people are blasphemously violating the fundamentals of their religions, because all the Abrahamic religions see humanity as having shared sacred humanity, and it is not. So they are not the fundamentalists. We are giving them a victory by calling them fundamentalists. Rather tragically, as a dear friend of mine, Imam Talit Sharif, who lives in Washington, said, when once asked, so why is it that there's sometimes hate and violence in the name of religion? He pointed out, power corrupts. Religion is powerful, and therefore, because religion is so powerful, the temptation of corruption is there. Or I once noticed that God, G-O-D, and ego, E-G-O, are so similar. But both have a go. If it's go with a D, you get God. go with an E and putting that E first, you get ego. So part of the message that I try to bring throughout my work in Israel, the Middle East, throughout the world, is to say that the authentic, we are not calling for a reform, not of religion, not of Islam, not of Judaism, but a return to the authentic, basic, core teachings and beliefs to allow us to return to a blessed fraternity. I'll give maybe one or two examples of why, and how things are perverted to be misinterpreted. And then this might be a topic which is connected to the lived reality of many of us. So maybe we'll give a stop for long discussion. And if there's time afterwards, I'll go back and share other aspects. But I'll give perhaps what in terms of what do I refer to as saying that a authentic interpretation as opposed to a deliberate perverse misinterpretation. One question: has Islam, in Islamic view, abrogated Judaism? If a religion is abrogated, sometimes it denies our most basic identity, seeing us as rejected. We could be seen as being rejected by God, or perhaps even hated by God. Certainly that could fuel religious violence. Where does unfortunately, widespread belief among many Muslims that Islam has abrogated Judaism, where does this come from? So first, let me read some very explicit quote from the Quran about the status of Judaism. And by the way, many people do not know this, but the phrase that Jews, we like to refer to ourselves as people of the book, is actually the origin is the Quran, not the Talmud. The Quran dozens of times refers to the Jewish people as Ahalu Kitab. Ahalu Kitab is translated as people of the book, which is nice, but I think somewhat lost in translation, because Ahal actually has connotations of family. You can maybe even notice it. Those here know Hebrew. Ohel is tent, the tent of the book, the family of the book. Now, so to quote, the chronologically, the latest surah of the Quran is Surah Al-Ma'idah. It's number 5, but that's because the Quran is arranged not chronologically, but based on size. Now, the Quran there writes, truly we sent down the Torah, which is the word Torah appears in Arabic, Torah. This which is a guidance and a light by which the prophets who submitted to God judge those who are Jews, added the sages and the rabbis, in according with God's book that they were bidden to preserve, that they are witnesses. So Torah is light and guidance. Later it talks about Quran be given to us. And then the Quran continues, had God willed, he would have made you one community, but he willed otherwise, that he may try you in which he has given you. So vie with each other in good deeds. It is absolutely explicit. The will of God from a Quranic perspective was give the Torah to the Jewish people, and this is light and guidance for them, and is the will of God for there to be different books to different people. Now, if this is the case, how is it that many, perhaps most Muslims believe that Judaism has been abrogated? It's partly by a quirky interpretation. I'll give you what it is and why it is wrong, and more and more Muslim scholars are speaking out about this. There's a verse elsewhere in the Quran that says true religion is Islam. Now, so that has been saying, this must be abrogating what was said, what I just read, because it says the right religion, the one and only, is Islam. Why is this incorrect? Because the Quran, and I've read the entire Quran in Arabic, Islama is a verb meaning submission. That verse is saying true religion is about submission to God. And in the verse that I read to you earlier, we sent the Torah, which is guidance and light. The prophets submitted, judge were Jews. The word Islama appears in the Quran relating to Jews who live by the Torah. So we have an absolute explicit statements of Torah being what Jews should live by, what they were given. In many places, you have one statement, Islama, as religion being Islama, but a total misinterpretation. Religion is submission. A Jew living by the Torah is Islama, is submitting to the will of God. So this is one example. I could give so many more. Yes, there are negative things about Jews said in the Quran, together with many positive things. But the negative things, many of them are stories from the Torah about the sin of the Egel. And the Quran often will state, has a verse, they are not all the same, to hope that people do not generalize that a specific story of certain Jews doing certain misdeeds not to be taken as a statement for all. But unfortunately, ego, power, ignorance have combined to lead to large segments of population espousing beliefs that are perversions of what I see, what me and many of my Muslim partners see as a perversion of what was the will of Muhammad and in Quran. And I'll do one last item of show and tell, and then let's open for discussion. And if you have more time, I'll go back to more issues. But I will have a show and tell object to share with you, relevant also to an American context. And maybe I'll add a few extra words about Islam in America, which I think is an important topic, because I assume that most of the people on this Zoom are in America. Am I correct, Jasmine? Right. Okay. So I'll do my show and tell now. Okay. So we have one of the giants of Islamic leadership and theology of our generation was Fethullah Gulen. He passed away about a year and a half ago. He's Turkish in origin, millions of very devoted followers, and he's written 80 books. I've read not all of them, but the ones I've read have been wonderful. And because his Islam is Islam, which is inclusive, open, he became designated by Erdogan as public enemy number one, and therefore he had to flee Turkey and ultimately passed away in exile in Pennsylvania. But he still has many millions of very devoted followers. Someone once said Erdogan is like the Wicked Witch in Snow White. Gets up, mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the best Muslim of them all? And when the mirror says Fethullah Gulen, it drives him bananas, so he's tried to assassinate Gulen. Anyway, I had the privilege of visiting Fethullah Gulen in his home and in exile in Pennsylvania. He was already very sick when I visited him, but he insisted on carrying out the meeting. I gave him a copy of the Torah in Arabic translation. He raised it up over his head and said, "This will be a crown on my head." And then his students gave me a gift that they had prepared for my visit. Okay, so I don't know if you could read it here. It has my name in Hebrew, and they chose a pasuk from Tehillim, and they wrote in calligraphy, Yedu Hashem kol masecha v'chasidecha yevruchucha. That all the creations of God should praise God, and the pious should bless. And I was told that indeed Islam, in addition to the Torah, gives a special status to Tehillim as a divinely revealed book. Zabir, it's referred to, and Gulen would encourage his students to study Tehillim. So if we think in American context, we have the Gulen Hizmit movement that throughout America, they have their charter schools, because a lot of them are in exile after persecution in Turkey. And maybe in order not to use up all the time, I'll tell another very cool, in an American context, of a major ally that I work on with Muslim Jewish Religious Fraternity, relating to the incredible story of the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam began in the 30s by a self-proclaimed prophet Elijah, an Afro-American, partly in protest against the establishment, called himself a prophet and even a prophet of Islam, which is actually heresy in Islam because the last prophet is supposed to be Muhammad. And he began the Nation of Islam. That's where Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali come in. But in the early 70s, there was a split in the Nation of Islam. One brand became even more radical, which includes very anti-Semitic, racist in many ways, and that's led by Farrakhan. But the other branch, the son of Prophet Elijah, W.D. Muhammad, brought his followers into mainstream Sunni Islam, and they now have 400 communities throughout America. And the leader, who's the Imam of America's oldest mosque which is in Washington, Imam Talib Sharif, has been a major partner in promoting Jewish Muslim religious fraternity. In the heart of the war with the Hamas, at his invitation, he brought a large group of imams from America. I brought a large group of rabbis from Israel to have a study. We said, let's meet midway, Morocco. And we spent a week studying together. The royal palace heard about it and asked us to come to the grave of the father and grandfather of the king to do special tefillot for them. So yes, I'm not denying the dark side of reality, but all the bad things you already know, all the negativity, all the weaponization of religion and religion identity, you know about this already. So there are limited time together. I won't repeat what you already know. I'm not saying everything is rosy, but together with all the negative things you know about, and unfortunately they're true, there's another side of reality and that exists, and it's that side that I believe is authentically expressing the will of God, the original meaning of the sources, and inshallah, Bezat Hashem, together we'll make the world look more like the Emirates, more like Morocco, Indonesia, and much of the positive aspects of within Israel and Jewish Muslim connections in Israel by religious Jews, religious Muslims that are so underreported and not known, but they exist. They're broad, they're powerful, and maybe even if it's a minority now, but this is the wave of the future. And I think maybe we'll take a round of discussions, and if there's more time, I'll go. No lack of things to talk about. Okay, so Jasmine, if you could open up, or Emma, I'm not sure exactly who the directors tonight, to open things up and to discussions, and then we'll see if we take it from here.
Yeah, if anybody has a question or a comment, feel free to unmute or to put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. So I guess, and it could also be not, or even a suggestion. I feel it. If we've done the trunk of the tree, it could spread out in so many directions. So if there's a particular direction that somebody is interested in, let me know, and I'll take the discussion from there. Okay, so you're leave. Okay, okay. So Avi's added important discussion. In what way does Christianity fit in here? Okay, so first of all, that's an important reminder because that actually is something very relevant and something that I think could give a lot of hope that things could change for this better. Recently, actually that's actually I say no, November, I was actually in the Vatican, and sometimes I describe it with the other guy with the white yarmulke. He was from I'm born in New York, he's from Chicago. I'm of course referring to Pope Leo. He's a Chicago Cubs fan, and I used to be with the Mets, but anyway, and the reason what brought me and the group of rabbiniot and rabbis that I brought to the Vatican was because to commemorate 60 years to Vatican II, what's referred to as Nostra Aetate, in our times, that there was a dramatic change in Christian theology. That specifically was Catholic, but this in many parallel ways has taken place to many other denominations, a profound change about the relationship between Christianity towards Jews and Judaism. And sometimes it's history, it's good to know history, to know how bad things were, to appreciate how dramatic things have changed. The horrors of the Middle Ages, of the blood libels, of the Crusades, and ultimately the Holocaust, and seeing how deeply rooted they were in Christian anti-Judaism, to acknowledge how bad things were, could help us appreciate how even though there's still a journey in front of us, there's still tensions, conflict, there's still anti-Judaism, it has different forms, and still within Christianity, there are challenges. But nevertheless, to see the traction of change, this is encouraging to that if we would study history about Christianity's approach to Jews and Judaism, whether it's the collective guilt and responsibility for literally all Jews guilty of killing God, and Jews that are eternally cursed to wander the face of earth, prayers on Good Friday in every church in the world for the perfidest Jews to repent and convert, to only if we remember how bad things were, we appreciate that changes can take place. So, and even change was a process. The formative document of the church in 1965, Nostra Aetate, in our times, was the beginning of a process. Again, reminding us, if we want to change the world, if we expect everything to happen now, we might defeat the ability to take a step in the right direction, because what is ultimately we're hoping is too big for any one step. So if in 1965, for example, if I talk about Catholicism, and still most Christians today are Catholics, and again, there's similar processes in other churches. Nostra Aetate mostly focused against anti-Semitism, saying that Jews are not collectively guilty of killing God. Against anti-Semitism, Jews are not cursed. Certainly, that was an incredibly important step. But it did not acknowledge Judaism as a living, valid religion. That took time. That took, to be explicit, was only in 2015 in another document of the church. The gifts of God are are irrevocable, referring to a verse from the book of the letter to the Romans in the New Testament, seeing that the covenant of God to the Jewish people is irrevocable, and therefore Jews can receive redemption through Torah and not needing to connect to God through Jesus. So yes, there's still a journey in front of us, but the Jewish-Christian relations is a sign things can change. In fact, in early years, I would talk about the Jewish-Muslim Nostra Aetate until I realized that many people actually don't know Latin. I mean, so I said, okay, we'll leave the Christians out of it, Jewish Christian Muslim religious fraternity, but certainly that's an example about things can change. And what's important, the church says, and I think this is correct, that this is not a reform, a rejection of their core beliefs, but rather with new eyes, rereading the sources and freeing from misinterpretations. It's not seen as a reform in terms of rejection, but rather a rereading. And perhaps because this is so important, and as of yet we haven't had more comments. I'll tell a little bit about the story behind Nostra Aetate, because I think it's very relevant in other contexts as well. In many ways, Nostra Aetate started as a response to the Holocaust, and a response because of a particular person and his personal story and suffering, and a book that was written. Jules Isaac was a French Jew whose wife and daughter were murdered by the Nazis, and he wrote a book, Jesus and Israel, which makes two claims. First, that although the Nazis did not do their atrocities in the name of religion, but it was the contempt and systematic demonization of the Jewish people through the language, the terminology of demonization, that is the basis in which the anti-Judaism of the Nazis developed, showing the diatribe about Jews through the ages were the concepts, ideas, and almost formulations that Nazis use in the final solution. This was one part of his work, saying the Holocaust, it took place because, not despite Christianity, but because of Christian anti-Judaism. Second, he argues it's based on a perverse interpretation of the New Testament itself. For example, from the New Testament, it's clear that Jesus was popular among the masses all being Jews. He's referring to Jews, to the people as Jews always. It was Paul who took Jesus' messages to the Gentiles. And the Jews who were against him were the small cabal of the high priest, which in Talmudic sources were seen as a corrupt collaborator with the Roman imperialists who bought their position for money, and the corrupt non-rabbinic Jewish collaborator with the Roman imperialists were hated by the Jewish masses. So clearly it was because Jesus was a popular preacher for the Jewish masses that the collaborators with the Roman imperialists did away with, had the Romans, ultimately European Romans, execute Jesus. So more and more Jesus is acknowledged as a Jew who lived by the Torah, a Jew who was killed by the Romans, and it was traitors to the Jewish people as a whole who were part of that, but to take that as a collective guilt and eternal responsibility of all Jews of all time is an inversion of the story, similar to some of the inversions we see now that of the upon heaped on the Jewish people. So the Pope read the book. The Pope read that book. It shook his entire theological world, and that he called Jews Isaac to a meeting, and from that meeting, the at the end of the meeting, Jules asked the Pope, Pope Yochanan the 23rd said, "Do I have a basic basis for hope?" He said, "You have more than that," and the Pope appointed Cardinal Bia to begin the process that led to Nostra Aetate. So Jews studying the sources of other religions, giving our perspective, talking from our story, yes, this could be important. This can make real changes. This was the story of Nostra Aetate, and I believe this is happening right now in what I hope will be one of the great breakthroughs of the 21st century, Jewish Muslim Religious Fraternity. Any more comments before I get to a closure? So I could close. The what?
I don't see any others, so I can read them out if they're in the chat, but otherwise, feel free to continue.
Okay, sure. So there is one verse that I often quote. I'll quote a verse from the Quran and a passage from the Zohar, which I see many ways paralleling one another. And I'll end with this message. After a discussion in the Quran of Ahalu Kitab, people of the book, family of the book, referring, as I said, to Jews, and some context includes also Christians, the Quran tells us, hold fast to the rope of God all together. Be not divided. Remember the blessing of God upon you when you were enemies, and he joined your hearts so that you became brothers by his blessing. Here we have a statement of a reality of enmity, but by truly holding on to the rope of God, the blessings of God upon us, and our hearts become joined. Similarly, the Zohar talks about a situation of enmity. At first, they appear as men waging war, seeking to kill each other. Afterwards, they appear in love, in brotherhood. When this happens, the Blessed One delights with you and proclaims peace upon you. And for your sake, peace will prevail in the world, as is written in the Hebrew, Laman achai v'rayai adabana shalom bach. For the sake of my brethren and companions, I will say, peace be upon you. So ultimately, Jews and Muslims, we are family, spiritually or biologically, descendants of our father Abraham. And I think if in the Middle East, which is so contested, we could promote the Abraham Accords, coexistence, the people in the Middle East, based on our deep religious identities, this could perhaps impact on so many other places in the world, sources of conflict. Okay, so it's a little bit earlier, but I think seeing that our small group, I think will leave it as is. Pleasure being together, and hope yeah, and you're all welcome to find ways to be partners in this endeavor. So many blessings.
All right, thank you so much, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you, Howard, for opening up so I could see you. well, looks like a great bookcase you have in the back over there. Okay, so take care. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing more about Muslim and Jewish interfaith work in the future. For those of you who are interested in going to one of our next classes next week on Tuesday, the 16th, we have Honesty is Godly, Why Faith is Crucial for a Just Society, taught by Rabbi Chaim Ovadia. And the next week, we have Religious Discourse in the Public Sphere with Rabbi Lindsay Taylor Guthartz. So keep an eye out for that and for the rest of our future classes. And thank you so much again to Rabbi Nagen for giving us this great talk.